Okay, we will reconvene the hearing for session 2 and hear from KiwiRail, which will be our last submitter for the day. Good afternoon. We're ready to receive your submission, just when you're ready.
Fantastic, thank you. Good afternoon, tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Kristen Gunnell and I'm appearing today as legal counsel for KiwiRail Holdings Limited. And I'd just like to thank you very much for accommodating our presentation online today. It's much appreciated. Joining me today are Michelle Brillinton-Hancock, who is the RMA team leader for KiwiRail, and Louise Taylor, who's provided expert planning evidence on behalf of KiwiRail. My legal submissions were pre-circulated, so I don't propose to go through them in detail, but instead speak to a summary of the key points. And you'll be aware that the key issue that the KiwiRail team wishes to present on today is setbacks, and in particular KiwiRail's submission seeking a 5-metre safety setback for buildings and structures from the rail corridor boundary in all zones adjacent to that rail corridor with associated matters of discretion. And Ms. Brillinton-Hancock will provide further detail on the rationale for that setback and the need for the 5 metres, but I just wanted to reiterate the purpose of the rail setback control. It avoids health and safety issues caused by people entering the rail corridor because they do not have enough space on their own properties. And it also, importantly, mitigates against incursions into the rail corridor and therefore allows for the continued safe and efficient operation of nationally and regionally significant infrastructure. And just to really stress, the KiwiRail land is not ordinary land. Heavy freight trains run regularly through this corridor. The panel will also be aware that KiwiRail is able to undertake all manner of rail activities within its designation, including adding or moving track closer to the boundary. The council officers have implied this problem can be solved by landowners just agreeing with KiwiRail to use the rail corridor when they need to maintain their houses or buildings and don't have enough room on their own properties to safely access those structures. In this way, the argument goes, KiwiRail is no different from any adjoining landowner. Just ask your neighbour if you can pop over the fence to clear your gutters or paint your building. With respect, this is not the same. We're not talking about popping over to the neighbour's place in your suburban street when you need to clear your gutters. Accessing a third-party residential property is not likely to be dangerous to either the person encroaching or the activities being undertaken on the neighbouring land. Encroachment in the rail corridor is an entirely different proposition and one which could have very significant consequences. We're talking about operational rail and freight corridors. The person encroaching is at risk from heavy moving trains. A purpose of the RMA is to enable people and communities to provide for their social, economic and cultural well-being and their health and safety. Enabling developments to be maintained safely and lawfully adjacent to the rail corridor is entirely in accordance with Council's obligations under Section 74(1)(b) of the RMA. And so just to sum up, the setback proposed protects people from potential safety risks, but also allows for the continued safe and efficient operation of that nationally significant infrastructure that we have in the rail network in the Gore District. So I'll now turn to Ms. Brillinton-Hancock, unless you did have any specific questions for me or whether you wanted to ask them when you've heard from all three of us.
Excuse me. You have some questions, Keith?
I'll wait to hear from all three.
Okay.
And, I think after the presentation's finished, we should hear from the planners who this morning have given us some additional evidence that also impacts on the submission, and then I'll ask questions after that.
Proceed, please, and we'll have some questions later.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Michelle Brillinton-Hancock. I'm the team leader of the RMA team for Again, I don't intend to read my statement in full, but just give you a summary of key points. The importance of rail and Gore. The rail network is nationally and regionally significant infrastructure asset. It's fundamental to the safe and efficient movement of people and goods throughout New Zealand, and the benefits of rail are well known. For example, rail produces at least 70% less carbon emissions per tonne of freight carried in comparison to heavy road freight. The key line in the Gore district is the main South Line, and KiwiRail expects that train movements on this line will only become busier as demand for rail freight continues to grow. It's critical to protect and provide for the ongoing operation and future development of the rail network by including appropriate controls in the proposed plan. With regard to setbacks, setbacks provide a physical distance between development and the rail corridor boundary. To be clear, the primary purpose of a setback is a safety buffer rather than to mitigate against rail noise or vibration. A setback mitigates against the need for people to enter the rail corridor by providing enough space for activities, like building maintenance, to occur on adjoining sites without those people being forced to access the rail corridor because of a lack of space. The rail corridor has a very different and high consequence risk profile compared to entering other sites. People entering the rail corridor are at significant risk to their own safety. The main South Line carries heavy freight trains that travel at speed, and KiwiRail workers also carry out other dangerous activities within the rail corridor, like the use of welding equipment to maintain track. Without adequate setback distance, landowners who need to use and access their buildings for maintenance or carry out other activities would need to ask KiwiRail for permission to access the rail corridor, or, if they choose not to ask for permission, trespass into the rail corridor and run the risk of being hit by a train. A permit to access regime is incredibly disruptive to the rail network, as it requires on-site personal or temporary closing of part of the track, and I therefore disagree with the council officer that adjoining landowners should just ask KiwiRail to access the rail corridor. In my opinion, the better planning outcome is to provide an adequate setback within the landowner's own property. The 5 metres sought by KiwiRail enables typical maintenance activities to be undertaken. These include scaffolding, support structures to stabilise scaffolding, space required for people to move around, use of mechanical access equipment, and an exclusion zone for dropped objects. This would enable landowners to use and maintain buildings on their properties safely without encroaching to the rail corridor and resulting in interference with rail operations. I also disagree with the council officer that KiwiRail should extend the area of designation. This would result in much greater constraints on private land than including a setback in the proposed plan. That's all I propose to speak to today, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
We'll hear them all and then come back to you.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Louise Taylor. I'm an independent resource management consultant, and in this instance I've prepared some independent planning expert evidence on behalf of KiwiRail, and I confirm that I am in compliance with the Environment Court's Code of Conduct for expert witnesses. You will obviously take my evidence as read, and what I plan to do is, you've heard from Ms Gunnell and Ms Grimlington Hancock about why the setback is an important requirement for KiwiRail's operations and to protect the health and safety of Gore's residents. So I don't intend to talk about that in any detail, but I just would like to refer to my evidence at paragraph 4.0, where I have assessed purpose and principles of the RMA, and in particular objective trend 1 of the Southland Regional Policy Statement, which refers to transport and land use, and associated policies flowing from that. In terms of KiwiRail's submissions, I've set those out in section 5 of my evidence, And in terms of in section 6, I've assessed that that submission in terms of my evidence, and have noted where the 42A officers have assessed it in their reports. They did note that no section 32AA assessment had been provided, which was correct, and so I've provided that in the appendix to my evidence. So in terms of 6.3 of my evidence and drawing on Ms. Grenelton Hancock's evidence, I do consider that to give effect to section 5 of the RMA, in particular clause 2, which, as you know, includes the for people's health and safety, and in particular objective INF.1 and policies INF.1, 3 and 5 of the Southland RPS, and in accordance with an appropriate transportation policy in the district plan, I do consider it is appropriate to require a building setback from the rail corridor. I note that in your plan there's various setbacks, and what we're really talking about is the rear and side yard setback. There is various numbers through your rules, and an example of that is in the mixed use zone, standard 3 has a 1.5 metre setback. You've heard from Ms. Grenelton Hancock as to why 5 metres as to why 1.5 is unnecessary for setbacks from the rail corridor. It is noted, and I accept that, as pointed out in the section 42A report, that in the SARS chapter there's already sufficient setbacks in the chapters in terms of standard 3, so there's no need to pursue the relief sought for Key-Rail in that regard. As I've noted in my evidence, it's not uncommon for district plans to include provisions which limit uses of land to protect the operation of infrastructure, and also to provide safe and healthy environments to people. I've got some examples there. In terms of other district plans that have this type of provision, I particularly looked at Dunedin City. It's quite a nice example, and if you did want the reference for that, it's Rule 6.74, and the way they've actually provided for it in Dunedin City is it's actually a standard included in the transport section, and within the various zone chapters there's a cross-reference that requires compliance with it, and so there's just one rule which applies to all the zones, and it refers to setback from a designated rail corridor, which I think is quite a tidy solution that may be worth considering in this instance. And noted for completeness that I have considered other methods, and I think Ms. Grenelton Hancock's covered that about why a 5 metre setback is the most appropriate option, rather than, say, extending a designation extension. It's my view that the setback is the most efficient outcome. In terms of the policy, Key-Rail submitted on policy mixed use zone policy 2, and I'm at paragraph 7.0 of my evidence. This is discussed in the 42A report at paragraph 236 to 243. I do agree with the report author that MUS P2 is not the appropriate policy to provide for the health and safety of Gore residents and rail operators. The 42A author does refer to trans policies and comes to the view that together trans PH, P9 and P10 address the relief of Kiwi Rail. And while I agree that the trans chapter is a better place to put the policy, I don't think the policies as currently worded provide clear enough direction to decision makers as to the need to manage both effects on the rail corridor and to protect adjoining landowners and operators when undertaking maintenance on buildings. I do note that Key-Rail has a submission on Trans P8, and I considered that to be the more appropriate location to include an additional clause along the lines of what I have set out in paragraph 7.3 of my evidence, and so I've listed the policy there, and I've included an X, which would be 6, as an additional clause for your consideration. I note that you are hearing that topic, I think, in September this year, so you may wish to consider that matter at that time. And I also understand KiwiRail intends to provide further evidence to the panel at that hearing regarding some other matters, so I'm sure we can come back to you then on this as well if that's preferable to you. So at paragraph 8.0, in conclusion, I support adding a new standard to the TCZ, LCZ, NCZ and NUZ rules, requiring buildings to be set back 5 metres from the rail corridor. I support non-compliance with these standards comprise a restricted discretionary activity, and with the matters of discretion being listed there 1 through to 3, and that's in accordance with the KiwiRail submission. And then in terms of C, adding a new clause to policy trans P8 as I've listed there at X, and I do have my section 32AA at appendix A to support my conclusions.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions.
I don't have any questions, but I believe...
Well, in the first instance, we received some further supplementary evidence from the planners this morning, and I doubt that you've had an opportunity to look at it, and possibly we need to be taken through that and get some feedback as well. So who's the planner responsible? Would you like to speak to what you've set out in the supplementary evidence, please?
Yes, sure. Sorry. I think we may have circulated the supplementary evidence, but I'm more than happy to talk through it. So, in response to the submission, we didn't rule out a setback originally. We just said we didn't have enough information about it, and I accept that the rail network is a significant infrastructure and that setbacks are sometimes the method used. I note that a lot of the concerns raised in KiwiRail's submissions focus on the tracks, which is obviously the higher risk area, but in some areas the designation is significantly wider than just the tracks. And we agree that it would someone relying on access on the rail corridor is not a good outcome, but we also don't think that private property owners should be unduly restricted in using their own land. And although health and safety is part of the purpose of the Act, so is providing for social and economic well-being of people. And we have noted that some of the properties affected are only 10 to 15 metres wide, so 5 metre setback is a significant chunk of that. So we have considered the 5 metre distance required and the reasons set out in the evidence. There's a couple of assumptions there around falling objects, support structures for scaffolding and access required around it. Although we accept that buildings do need maintenance, and a setback is a way of allowing for maintenance to structures, it seems like some of these assumptions that a 5 metre is based on may be excessive in the trajectory of the falling object, and that access around buildings and elsewhere within the district, people appear to be able to maintain their buildings within their property boundaries with a lesser space. So we have set out what the different setbacks are in the commercial and mixed-use zones in a table at the supplementary evidence. So as an alternative to the 5 metre safety setback standard, we are suggesting to include a setback to the rail corridor within those side and rear yard setbacks, and include an additional matter of discretion for the commercial centre and mixed-use zones. We have looked at other recent plan changes and district plan reviews, and there's a bit of a mixed response to the Kiwi Rail 5 metre setback. Some people are rejecting it outright. Some councils are rejecting it outright. Others have included it in the normal setback, and others have accepted it. So it's not a consistent approach. I've also provided a section 32AA assessment based on the 2 metre setback, and in relation to the purpose of the Act, as I mentioned, I believe a lesser setback balances more appropriately the social and economic provision for people. I also note that we have some strategic objectives within the plan that talks about developing in a cohesive way, in a way that provides for economic growth, as well as protecting the transport networks and having good access to those. So I think both of those things are important. Of course, a 5 metre setback would provide greater protection for the rail corridor, but then obviously that comes at a greater cost to the individual landowner, and I think we need to consider both. Our recommendation is to just include it in the normal 2 metre setback and 1.5 metre setback, and in relation to the trans chapter, of course, we can talk about that at the transport hearing.
So I guess in summary, what the planners are saying is it is appropriate to have a setback from the rail lines, from the rail boundary, which isn't provided for in the plan at present. And what they're recommending is that the setback that applies to the zones should also be a setback for the rail, as opposed to the 5 metres that Kiwi Rail are asking for. So I doubt I don't know if you want to give any feedback in terms of what you've just heard. I suspect that it doesn't change what you've said.
Thank you, sir. You'd be right in that estimation. And I guess we unfortunately haven't had a chance to look at the supplementary evidence, and we'd be very happy to provide a response in writing once we've had a chance to go through it. But I guess just some initial comments are that Kiwi Rail absolutely still maintains that 5 metres is necessary, and that 2 metres and 1.5 metres, I think, is being suggested is not sufficient, and we would be happy to provide further information on that. We've been developing a more fulsome Section 32, which is at final review stage, so we will have shortly some much more detailed information on the actual to build on that appendix diagram that is attached to Ms. Grimlington Hancock's evidence. And I guess just an initial response to the focus on the track, but sometimes the designation boundary is wider, just to really stress that Kiwi Rail has a designation to railway purposes, and that track can move. There could be sidings put in, there could be yard works, and all manner of sort of locomotive maintenance and operational activities that could be put even in that wide designation, and in some respects the wider the designation the more it might be used for something like that. So I guess it's just thinking ahead with this plan being a 10-year horizon, and not wanting someone to think, well, I can build right up to my boundary because I'm really far from the rail tracks, but then actually have a siding right next to them in 4 years' time. Michelle or Louisa, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but I guess we'd be very happy to provide some further further information and a response in writing once we've had a chance to review that supplementary evidence.
And
Look, the only other thing I would add is in terms of Gore specifically, the main south line goes right through Mataura and Gore. It's a key infrastructure that runs through your district. And I had a look earlier, and actually I think it almost goes past every zone you've got in your plan. So there's a real mix of land uses that occur right next to the main south rail. So I think it is an important issue for Gore specifically, and I certainly would encourage you not to I guess to take the opportunity that you've been presented with here. The other thing I thought I'd note is I referred to the Dunedin City example that has a 4 metre setback, so that's not 5, just to be clear, and I did state that in my evidence, but just to be clear on that.
mention was made of Kiwi Rail's 10-year planning horizon. I think the council would hope that priority number 1 on your 10-year plan is actually looking at the security of the railway bridge we have across the Mataura River, where floodwaters at present river levels are extremely close to the top of the bridge. Just I guess to take every opportunity to make that point. The key of what you're promoting really is that you don't want people using railway land to access doing construction, repairs and maintenance of their own buildings. The way the plan rules are written, within the setback zone there can be eaves and other structures on the side of buildings, and there can be carports. Do you want to comment on that at all? And I would just wonder how the Dunedin City Council in their plan deal with those two things.
Shall I go, or are you going to go there, Michelle?
I'm just thinking about my planner's hat versus my Kiro hat, so I'm going to let you be the planner and I'm just going to be Kiro.
Yeah, no, that's right, sir. And I did note that particularly the eaves and gutters, I think if there was a 5 metre setback and the eaves and gutters intruded into that, I don't think that would be a major concern. I note the structure of your plan, and the last thing we want to do is mess with the way your rules are structured. The carport, though, does become potentially more difficult, although, again, I think it still provides some level of setback. I'm just looking at NCZS4, which is 0.5 from a rear boundary, so it does provide a smaller setback for carports. So I do note that there is some structure in there, a framework in there for a smaller setback, but still a setback for carports. So the rule as sought is actually to provide a separate standard for setbacks from the rail corridor, rather than messing with your existing ones.
Many years ago, New Zealand Rail sold off land adjoining the railway, between the railway and the state highway, that is approximately 10 metres wide, and some of it's in car sales, some's in other uses, some's got buildings. So what do you say to the landowners who own a property 10 metres wide? They can only put up a building that's set back 5 metres from the rear boundary, and I believe they need a setback of several metres from the front boundary as well. So in effect, we're ending up with a situation where it probably is not economical, practical to actually erect a building on those sites.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a restricted discretionary activity, so and the matters of discretion are quite straightforward. So it would require a resource consent process, and the effects of the particular building that the landowner wanted to be constructed would be considered in that particular matter.
So if the building they wanted to put up was no more than 3 metres high, what sort of setback would you expect in those conditions from the rail boundary?
If I can speak to that for a moment. So these rules are not, as Louise has said, uncommon across the country, and we do on a relatively regular basis get applications for consent to intrude into the setback, and essentially we have a conversation with the applicant about getting them to demonstrate to us how they can reasonably access their building to maintain it within the space that they are setting aside for themselves. And that has proven to be, in terms of a restricted discretionary criteria, working quite well.
And, well, I guess the way that a lot of people's thinking is going is that if you can avoid a resource consent and yet still have a reasonable outcome, then it's a win-win. So when I look at Michelle's evidence, it's got the pretty diagrams on the back of it in Appendix A relating to the height of the building and the need for different setbacks. Why can't we have a rule that meets your objectives that relates to the height of the building being erected on the land? So if they're only putting up a building that's 2.8 high, the amount of setback you would need from the boundary would be significantly less than a standard 5 metre one.
That's not an unreasonable conclusion, and the Section 32 does provide more detail on how we got to that diagram. So I think that hopefully we will be able to provide that to you in the next week or so. And happy to do that, and that will give you a better basis for that that diagram.
Because what was generated by the diagrams, the evidence that came from Kiwi Rail plus the Section 42A and the supplementary, I'm wondering whether it's worth exploring almost a hybrid of what the council advisors and yourselves are promoting in terms of having a rule rather than doing it on the maximum height allowed in the zone, but relating it to the actual effect of a building going up, i.e. the proposed height of the building. And I don't know if the planners who did the 42A report want to comment on that option now or wait till you see something.
Just as a general thought, that was one that we did consider a height to boundary approach because it provides that flexibility and also recognises that the higher the building, likely the more support structure you would need in a setback. So, yeah, I'd like to see what you based your evidence on, but as an initial thought, that's yeah, could be a good idea.
I just have a question. Has there been any incidences of interference in the rail corridor in the Gore district over the past few years?
Look, that's not information I have to hand, but I can investigate our Aura system for you and provide comment on that.
I think that would help. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I guess it's reasonable to allow you some time to have a look at the supplementary evidence and also respond to my comment. What sort of time frame would you be able to get something back to us? Would early next week be okay, or would that be a bit tough?
I think, sir, given the Matariki holiday, if we could respectfully ask for a little bit more time, that would be greatly appreciated.
Okay.
Perhaps, Michelle, do you think the end of next week would be doable?
Okay. So we can issue a minute, provided other panel members agree? Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your submission. Yeah. Anything else to add?
Oh, so I was going to just to clarify what you're looking for. So obviously you're looking for a response from Kiwi Rail in terms of the supplementary provided by the 42A officers, and I think I heard Councillor Hovell ask about a hybrid rule, a height in relation to boundary type rule. Is that something that you'd be looking for from KiwiRail to provide as a potential solution, or are you looking for your officers to provide that?
I would like KiwiRail to provide some feedback in terms of what I call the hybrid option, and I would also then, as part of the wind up to the hearing, be looking at the planners to comment on it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your submission and more information. We do appreciate it, and we'll hear from you in due course, and no doubt through the course of through the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, we've come to the end of the submissions to be received. We've still got a little bit of time left. Are there any issues that we can tackle now at the end of the day and work our way through before we call it a day from the other side of the...
Can I just clarify, are you still wanting us to come back tomorrow, or... Yeah.
That's what we're trying to establish.
Right.
Whether there's any feedback that you believe we need now would be ideal, or whether brain fog is setting in and you want to delay. So I guess we're in your hands there.
Can I just say so the team have been taking some notes about the things that we've said we'll come back to you on through the day. Are you wanting us to reflect those back to you? And if you do, then maybe we need to do that in the morning, unless the team have got a comprehensive list now. Or are you wanting particular issues to be investigated, discussed?
There's a list. I'm not convinced it's comprehensive just yet. We might need 10 minutes or so to ensure that.
So I guess we're in your hands in terms of whether we take a 15-minute break or so to let you put your heads together. If you want to use meeting room 5, feel free. And if you are able to come back this afternoon, that avoids you coming back in the morning. We're happy, I guess, to stay a bit longer if need be.
Cool. We'll try and make it as fast as possible.
We'll take a break. And we'll adjourn.